International Studies of the Jawaharlal Nehru University in Delhi joins us. Good evening to you, Professor Singh. Now, what do you make of what has happened in Hong Kong, not just with the convicted pro-democracy activists, but with those who inhabit the altogether under China's control city?
Thank you, Gautam. I think what makes it particularly interesting for India is that even today, about 44,000 people of Indian origin, including 32,000 plus holding Indian passports, are in Hong Kong. So, whatever happens in Hong Kong is of direct interest to India. Now, to your question as to what is happening, which is reflected in the judgment that your report just showed, is a larger transition. We all understand that in 1997, United Kingdom finally transferred Hong Kong back to China under a system called One Country, Two Systems, which was coded in a document called Basic Law. Now, that Basic Law had clearly guaranteed Hong Kong that they will maintain for another 50 years the capitalist system and way of life and a high degree of autonomy. Now, what makes it very interesting is that all powers to interpret basic law were given to the Chinese, who were now transferred Hong Kong, and Hong Kong was to ultimately merge with mainland China. Now, it is part of that exercise that whereas the Western world wants to ensure that the capitalist system and way of life and the basic freedoms are maintained till 50 years, which is till 2047, which again is relevant for India's 100 years of independence. Chinese believe that they will have to incrementally change it and completely make it into communist China by the end of 50 years. So that is where the disjunction of interpretations happens, and that has not been fundamentally very acceptable to the Hong Kong people themselves. If one has to listen to how Hong Kong people have responded to it, we are talking here of 47 people who were rounded off way back in January of 2021. They were told that they were making attempts for subversion, but fundamentally what was happening was a very popular movement at that time. In that 2019 district council elections, pro-democracy candidates had virtually swept much of the council boards at that time. And next in 2020, they were hoping that they will also now take over the LegCo, which is Legislative Council, and ensure that it follows the will of the people in Hong Kong rather than listening to the voice of Beijing in that sense.
Right.
Now, see, the impact that can be very quickly measured is that in 2019 district council elections, there were 79% voting that happened compared to last year. Again, district council voting happened only 27%. Now, that clearly reflects the acceptance levels of Hong Kong people in terms of changing that are taking place in that sense. And one could go on giving several examples, but this voting pattern, I think, is a very clear example of Hong Kongers not being very happy with the speed of changes that Beijing wants to bring about.
Okay. Now, rights activists world over have come down hard on these convictions, but against China as well. But why do you think Beijing is just not bothered?
I think Beijing obviously feels much more emboldened because of its economic the power that it has, nearly 20 trillion economy, a very powerful one-party rule, one-man rule virtually. And it's not just Hong Kong. I mean, look at other issues where again China is being questioned by Western countries, whether it is the way it treats Taiwan or whether it is the way it treats Tibetans or it treats Uyghurs in Xinjiang. Overall, I think Western countries have constantly been talking about China's record of human rights, of democracy, and other transparency and accountability issues. But all those issues, including then on issue of Hong Kong, Chinese leadership doesn't feel really need to either explain or rectify its way of life, its behavior when it comes to ensuring basic freedoms in Hong Kong. So I think this court judgment and the process of collectively these 47 people have spent 108 years in jail, just in detention, without even trial beginning. So that is an overall approach that Beijing leadership has, and this is again happening in case of Hong Kong as well.
Right. Now, you mentioned this earlier, but when the Brits returned Hong Kong to China in 1997, the condition was that the levels of civil liberties enjoyed by Hong Kongers will remain the same for 50 years. Now, clearly, this has not been met. Can anything be done about it?
I think it is basically important for all major democratic countries, countries that want to make sure China's rise happens within the rules and regulations, following the norms that have been well established over the last 75 years since Second World War. And in that sense, there are certain expectations from China, and particularly if the people of Hong Kong themselves are clearly indicating discomfort with the way Chinese have been conducting state of affairs there. I think that itself should be a good way, a good barometer to understand the responsibility and onus then lies on several other countries, including Great Britain, which was controlling Hong Kong till 1997. One, of course, must also underline the fact that it is not that Britishers had maintained any democracy in Hong Kong before they gave it away to Chinese. It was having an advisory council at that time, which was not popularly elected again. So it is part of the process of giving it back to China that, Chris Patton at that time, the governor, had also started talking about democratization and reforms and transparency and people's representation and so on.
Okay.
But of course, the basic law is the way one should look at it now. And since basic law clearly puts it that Hong Kong has protection under international law, things like covenant of civil and political rights, Hong Kong should be in charge of its own trade, tourism, communication, and so on, and only defense and diplomacy will be with the Chinese. And even now, the Communist Party doesn't have any role in controlling Hong Kong. Of course, the National People's Congress, which is the legislature, also legislates for Hong Kong in that sense. So, because China is one party controlled nation, that is the effort in which Communist Party wants to make sure that the people who come to the Legislative Council in Hong Kong or become chief executives. For example, the last time there was contest for chief executive in Hong Kong, there was only one candidate, because there is now a election committee which vets what they call that the candidate should be patriot, which means they should be subservient to the Communist Party of China. So there was one candidate to contest for chief executive in that sense. So I think that kind of rather, I think, top-down approach of transformation which is being implemented in Hong Kong is something that is not clearly very well accepted by the Hong Kong people themselves, and that calls upon nations like United Kingdom and of course United States and others to keep an eye on it and see how they can make sure that
But the kind of situation that is developing because of this sort of a conviction, this set of convictions, do you think that the aspirations of democracy that Hong Kong has very latently, because Hong Kong, which has had democratic aspirations for a long time, which at the moment are stifled? Thanks a lot for joining us, Professor Swaran Singh. Now,